Sometimes in first grade, we need to watch a video. Our teachers make them so we can learn at home. This one's for math on May 25th. Do you think you're ready for this? Because last week you learned to tell time to the hour. Time to the hour. But then this week we're gonna learn time to the half hour. Time to the half hour. Hey first grade, this is Mrs. Katzenberger. This is your first math video for the week of May 25th, and we're gonna be learning about time to the half hour. Now I'd like to start our lesson this week with a really quick short review of some of the things we learned last week. Now we know that time is something that can be measured. And if we're going to measure something, we need tools and we need units to do that. So last week we learned about minutes. Minutes are very short units of time. They're only 60 seconds. And we talked about how in a minute you might be able to tie your shoes or make your bed. We also learned about hours, which are a little bit longer. That's 60 minutes. And in an hour, you might be able to help mom cook dinner or take a bicycle ride around your neighborhood. We also learned about two different tools that we can use to measure time. One of these is a digital clock. And you remember that digital clocks are clocks that only have numbers on them. When we read a digital clock, we start first with the hour. That's the first number that we see. Next come the minutes. And we separate the hours and the minutes with that little punctuation mark that we call a colon. And we would read this digital clock as just 1 o'clock. You also learned about analog clocks, which have faces and hands. We read the time the same way. We start first with the hour. Hour is a short word, so that means that's the shorthand. This hour hand is pointing to 1. And then we move on to the minutes. Minute is a longer word, so that's the longer hand. And you learned that when the minute hand is pointing straight up at the 12, that means no minutes have gone by since the hour started. And we would also read this time on the analog clock as simply 1 o'clock. Now this week, like I said, we're going to be learning about time to the half hour. I remember from a couple of weeks ago that when I have two halves of something, that means I have two equal pieces. So I'm going to kind of partition my clock here into two equal pieces. Now, when your minute hand moves around the clock, it moves in what we call a clockwise direction. That means it's moving this way in order, the way that the numbers go. So for a half hour, that's the amount of minutes that it takes for our minute hand to get from 12 all the way around to 6. And if an hour is 60 minutes, a half hour, half of that, would be 30 minutes. Now on digital clocks, it's really easy for us to read those times because, again, it's just numbers and we know our numbers. So for instance, this clock is telling me the time 3:30, or another way that you could express this time in words would be to say half past 3. So let's look at another one. Okay, really easy to see. So if I were to write this in words, I would say 6:30, or I could also say half past 6. So now is a good time to pause the video get something to write with, something to write on just really quickly. And there are 2 different ways to write this time in words. Go ahead and do that for me now. All right. So hopefully one of the ways that you wrote down was 4:30. And then the second way, do you remember what it was? If you wrote 4:30, give yourself a nice pat on the back, toot your own horn, because you are correct. So now let's look at an analog clock together, and let's see what time to the half hour looks like on an analog clock. Now, just like we told time to the hour, the first place that we want to look is the hour hand, the shorthand. And if I look at my shorthand here, it looks like it's pointing, well, it looks like it's pointing between 2 numbers. It's between the 5 and it's between the 6. And then the minute hand is pointing down at the 6. So I have to think back a little bit. I know that it's been more than 6 minutes. If it's been a half hour, I know that means 30 minutes. And if I count by 5s around my clock, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, my minutes are going to be 30, but I'm really stuck on this hour here. What do you think we should do? Should we just pick the one that we like better? Do we think it's 5:30 or do we think it's 6:30? Well, I'm going to show you something on the next page. So we talked a couple of minutes ago about the minute hand moving in a clockwise direction, and I'm going to show you that now. And while I am moving my long minute hand, I want you to watch what happens to the short hour hand as well. So here's my minute hand. I'm moving it to show that a half hour is going by. And do you see what is happening with my hour hand? It's moving too, but a lot more slowly. And just like on the last page, it is now between 2 numbers. It's between the 12 and the 1. Now, when I started back here, we remember that this time shows 12 o'clock. And now I'm moving my minute hand to the 6, and my hour hand is between the 12 and the 1. If I were to keep going, if my minute hand would keep moving towards the 7 and the 8 and the 9, watch my hour hand. When it gets past 11 and we get all the way back to the 12, you all know that this time is showing 1 o'clock. But remember, the time that we were looking at just a bit ago, that came before 1 o'clock. You may also remember that one of the ways to say time to the half hour in words was the way half past. Well, let's look at my hour hand. My hour hand has moved halfway past the 12, and it hasn't gotten to 1 o'clock yet. So the time that I am showing on this analog clock right here is 12:30 or half past 12. I think these words half past are really going to help you as we read some more of these analog clocks. So now let's look at this analog clock. We're going to start with our short hour hand. And if I look at that, it's between the 4 and the 5. But remember, it hasn't gotten to 5 just yet, but it has moved half past the 4. So my hour is going to be 4, and the minutes are going to be the amount of minutes it takes for the minute hand to go halfway around the clock, and that is 30 minutes. So my analog clock here is showing the time 4:30, or another way that I can say it, get in the habit of doing this, boys and girls, is I could also say 4:30. This is a pretty tricky skill, so I hope you have time to hang out with me and practice a few more examples, like this one. So I'm starting with my short hour hand. Here it is between two numbers, but I know that it has moved half past the 9. It has not gotten to 10 just yet. My minute hand is pointing straight down at the 6, so it has moved halfway around the clock. So what time do you think my clock is showing here? Which hour? 9 or 10? Well, you just heard Mrs. Katzenberger say it hasn't gotten to 10 just yet. It's moved half past the 9. So 9 is my hour, and the minutes are going to be 30. So my clock here is showing 9:30, or another great way to remember it, especially when you're looking at that hour hand, is 9:30. So let's do this one. It's probably a good time to practice writing some of these down too as we practice. So start with your short hour hand. Here we go. Which is it? 6, 7. It's halfway past which hour, and then how many minutes has it been? Go ahead and pause the video and write down those 2 ways we can show this time, the way it would look on a digital clock and using words. So hopefully you realize that that hour hand has not quite gotten to 7 just yet, but it has moved half past the 6. So that makes the time on this clock 6:30 or 6:30. Let's do one more together. All right, darlings. Start with that short hour hand. Notice where it is. Has it gotten to a particular time yet? Or has it moved half past an hour? Go ahead and pause the video. Write down those 2 ways to show the time. Pause now. So my short hour hand has not made it to the 3 yet, but it has moved halfway past the 2. That makes the hour 2, and our minutes that we've been practicing this whole lesson, it has been 30 minutes. That's how long it takes for our minute hand to get halfway around the clock. So this one is showing 2:30. So here's that clock that we started with. Now that we've practiced a few times, if my hour hand is between the 5 and the 6, hopefully we realize now that the hour shown on this clock is 5. The minute hand is pointing straight down at the 6, so that's 30 minutes, or I could say 5:30. Just remember, boys and girls, if you're lost and need help, you can watch this again, time after time. Have a wonderful day. Head on over to Seesaw and show your teachers what you've learned.